Good morning, everybody. My name is Harriet Emerson. I'm the program administrator here at the Eastern Council on Aging. And we're very honored today to have Andrew Gottlieb, who's the executive director of the Association to Preserve Cape Cod. And we're all very interested as residents here in Eastham and in Cape Cod to learn more about what the APCC, its many programs and activities. And I think Andrew's going to dwell down on Eastham and our neck of the woods, and also leave us with some tips and tricks on what we can do today to help preserve Cape Cod and our communities.
Sure.
So without further ado, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
So we run a variety of programs. I'll focus on a little bit, and then we talk about anything of particular interest. But you know, one of the things that we've been doing, and we're still at this year, especially given how nice the weather is, monitoring freshwater ponds. And, we've been involved with an organization in promoting town programs that deal with nutrient loading for wastewater and improving town municipal wastewater treatment programs as a means of minimizing the nutrient loading that's going into our estuaries and ponds. I know that Eastham is moving forward pretty aggressively now with broad comprehensive wastewater management program that's going to seek to improve water quality. And a lot of the work that we did on that side of the agenda was on making money available. And so thanks to the work of a lot of people, not the least of which retiring State Rep Sarah Peak and Senator Sear, there's now a really strong funding source available for Cape towns who are looking to manage nutrient loads and wastewater that moves about 25% of the cost of these projects off of the property tax rate and onto a special trust fund that's funded out of a surcharge and overnight stays. So as Eastham begins to look at implementing a wastewater management program, there's a lot of money out there that will minimize the cost and impact on town taxpayers. So having kind of in some ways cracked that nut, we've started to turn in the last few years our attention to freshwater ponds. And so we are doing two things in the freshwater environment. One is known as the Freshwater Initiative, which is a program that we're under contract with Barnstable County through the Cape Cod Commission to conduct field sampling 7 months of the year, March through November, October, November, depending on the pond, where we're looking at standard water quality parameters in 50 ponds across the Cape, working in every town on the Cape, and just massing a body of 3 years worth of data to understand what water quality conditions are in the ponds, so that we can work with the commission to try and come up with a way to characterize how ponds are on the Cape, which types of ponds are most threatened: shallow ponds, deep ponds, heavily developed watersheds, lightly developed watersheds, what the composition of the land, the use of land around these ponds, the impact of stormwater, sort of do a diagnosis of what is contributing to overall decline in water quality in ponds. The second piece of that work that we're doing that is independent of the contract with the commission is cyanobacteria monitoring. So we are doing monitoring in all 15 towns, sometimes working with and for a town, sometimes working with landowners or pond associations to do monitoring. We do have a contract with town of Eastham this year, thanks to our good partnership with Hillary Lemos, your relatively new health agent, where we monitor every 2 weeks the ponds, some of the ponds in your town and across the Cape for presence or absence of cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria is a ancient form of blue-green algae that is present and occurs in healthy freshwater ecosystems, but when fed and living in water temperatures that are warm, as ours increasingly are, cyanobacteria can proliferate and have a bloom to the extent that certain species of it can give off toxins that are harmful to mammals. They are based on, the severity is based on sort of the concentration of the toxin and your exposure. It's a body mass thing. So the bigger the being, the bigger the mammal, the less impact a given dose will have. So what that means is children and pets are both vulnerable. And so our program looks at the near shore concentrations of cyanobacteria and applies the state public health standard guidelines that exist for both toxicity for one specific toxin, microcystin, as well as the severity of scum lines, since cyanobacteria have a tendency to float. They have a tendency, because they float and are buoyant, to blow to the downwind side of a pond. So prevailing southwest winds on Cape Cod in summer means the northeast shorelines tend to be those that are most generally affected. So because most people will gain their exposure from a shoreline entry, we look at those shoreline areas and advise people based on the application of the domestic pH guidelines what the characterization of that particular pond is over a given sampling round. We know that uniformity of the concentration is variable across the pond, and we tend to advise based on the most protective standard that we can from a particular location. So if we find a concentration in a particular location and we color our map, which you can find online at abcc.org, we color our map with one of two colors, either yellow, so reason for caution, or red, where it exceeds the state health standard. That one particular location is reflected in the entirety of the pond. And the reason we do that is we're not out every day. Change day to day, they change hour to hour. They have a strong southwesterly wind, pushing all the cyanobacteria up to one shore. Front comes through, the wind turns around, goes to the northeast. All of a sudden, the wind blows all that cyanobacteria down to another part of the lake that, if you told people on day one, was okay, but later on that afternoon, the wind, we can't account for all that. So our cyano program is geared towards giving people information that they need. That map is updated on a daily basis during the sampling season, so that anybody who has interest in recreating in a particular freshwater body has the ability to go look at that particular pond and see what the latest data is. That said, use your judgment. If we go to the pond and it looks neon green or murky green, you might want to not go in. If it looks clear, maybe it's fine, maybe it isn't. So one of the things, and the reason I say that is that when these balloons crash, they can crash very rapidly, and the water can go from very cloudy to very clear in a very short period of time. When those cells die to create the clarity, they release all the toxins that were in the cells. So the water can be at its most toxic right after it clears up. So knowing what's going on, not all clear ponds, most of their ponds have no toxicity in them. If the pond's been clear for several days or a couple of weeks, and you go and it looks clear, that's great. The pond has been pea soup green on Monday, and you go and on Tuesday it's crystal clear. That's one you might want to think about avoiding. There's a lot of information on our website that people can use to familiarize themselves with what to look at. Our data is one of many factors people should take into account when they decide whether to enter the water or not. In terms of tips, your pet goes in and you're concerned about it. Pet exposure comes in two forms. First is most dogs, when they run in the water, open them out and start drinking. That's an obvious one. The less obvious and more insidious one is when they come out of the pond, at some point, they're going to lick themselves dry and groom. If they're licking cyanobacteria off their fur, they're ingesting an additional dose. So if your dog goes in, get them out. And then wash them down with a clean source of water and dry them off, and they should hopefully be fine. So why cyanobacteria has become a bigger problem, and what we don't know, because we haven't only been at it for 6 years, is how different things are than they used to be. So we get asked that all the time, are things getting worse? We think they are. Okay, but we don't know because we've only been monitoring for 6 years. One of the things we're doing with the Cyano program right now is we're working with Cape Cod Commission and NOAA to try and look at and understand how a lake looks from space says about what's happening on the ground. So the eye in the sky sees these ponds in their different colors. So we've been working for 2 years now on lining up when NOAA satellites are overhead, taking images of Cape ponds. We're sampling ideally on that same day so that we can assess what a particular color scheme looks like from sky as to what's actually being seen on the water. What that's going to let us do is use satellite imagery to determine which ponds are most at risk at a given time and sample those perhaps more heavily than we might otherwise. So we're targeting our sampling in a way that's more efficient. The other thing it lets us do is go back and look at historical record of satellite imagery and interpret what that meant. So we're actually going to be able to look back and build a record to be able to answer the question, are things getting better, are things getting worse? So more to come on that. The two things that make cyanobacteria more prevalent are food, and by food I mean nutrients, and by nutrients I mean resources. Septic waste, fertilizer runoff, and stormwater. So in terms of individual action, the wastewater piece tends to require action at a municipal scale. There's not that much an individual can do. You know, you have a septic system, it's adding nutrient load to the groundwater. That's just a simple fact of how they're designed. You could put in a composting toilet, most people won't. So wastewater needs town solutions. Choosing fertilize or not fertilize your yard is your choice. If you live adjacent to a pond, and even if you don't, you live on a street that's got storm drains, you fertilize, that nutrient runoff washes off your yard, goes into a storm drain when it rains, enters the groundwater, flows to the pond. So fertilizing is a discretionary activity that you as an individual have complete and utter control over what happens on your property. Our advice, and a lot of the guides we provide on our website, is to change the nature of your yard to become less turf grass heavy. Add into your turf grass if you need it. Clover, allow moss to grow, stop putting down the broadleaf herbicides and pesticides that diminish species diversity. And by putting those types of plants in your yard and minimizing your lawn area, replacing lawn with native plants that are well acclimated to our soils, well acclimated to our climate, don't require the use of fertilization, you can minimize the impact and need that your yard has for supplemental chemical treatment in order to be green and thriving. Native plants, lawns with clover, lawns with moss, stay green longer than turf grass. They require less water than turf grass. They require no fertilizer and no herbicide applications. So if you want to do something to improve the quality of your pond, you can do a lot by minimizing what you add in nutrients to your landscape. The other thing that we advise is that people restore their native plantings. We have a lot of information on native plants. We have a native plant finder on our website, so you can describe the conditions in your yard, slope, access to sun, shade, and the like, and it will tell you what native plants are well suited to your particular yard environment. So by doing that, you're also not only supporting a lower nutrient requiring landscape, but you're also providing support to native plants and insects and animals that are evolved to rely on these types of plantings. So you can do a lot for your environment locally by what choices you make as an individual, and that will be reflected in water quality. So the question we'd like to ask people to think about a little bit is the green lawn you have worth a pond for that? Because the two things are related. So lay off fertilizers, and no, it really doesn't matter whether your fertilizers are organic or chemical. A molecule of food that ends up in that water, when it reaches the water body and feeds the plant life in the pond, the plant doesn't really much differentiate or care between the derivation of the nutrients. So its effect is the same. So a lot of times we hear, I told my landscaper I didn't want to fertilize it. He said, don't worry about it, it's organic. Okay. There's some benefits to organic products as opposed to petroleum-based products, but in terms of what we're trying to solve for, it doesn't really matter. Same thing is true of pesticide use in your yard. A lot of people have gotten, there's a big industry around mosquito and tick control spraying, and you're told, don't worry about it. We spray it organic. Well, the purpose of that organic material is to kill something. They're non-specific, non-targeted. So anything that ends in CID means it's a toxic compound to a targeted species, in this case, insects. So if they're spraying to kill. And, you know, the loss of insect population is significant. Not everybody likes birds, not everybody likes bugs, but most people like birds. Most of the birds around, you know, they're really good mosquito eaters. And they're really dependent, especially when they're raising young, on caterpillars. Well, caterpillars are the things that make holes in the leaves. So people spray their ornamental trees because they don't want holes in the leaves. When you do that, you're taking away this food source for birds, and you're forcing. So I think it's something like a black-capped chickadee needs 5,000 caterpillars to feed its young, which means they're going back and forth constantly. If you have sprayed your yard and there are no caterpillars in your trees, then that bird has to fly next door. If they spray, they have to fly next door. All of a sudden, instead of being able to make 20 food deliveries to their young over the course of an hour, maybe they're doing 5. Well, guess what? A lot of those birds die. Big birds die. So think about the implications of what you do in your yard, whether you like a noisy yard filled with birds or not. And are you willing to live with a couple of caterpillar holes in your tree leaves as a result of that to get that benefit back? Something to think about. Other stuff that we're working on right now is certainly relevant to a coastal community like Eastham, as we've been engaged the last, feels like forever, but the last 2 years on trying to prevent the company that's decommissioning the Pilgrim nuclear power plant from discharging what was 1.1 million gallons of radioactive industrial wastewater from a core reactor building in Cape Cod Bay. So in early 23, we submitted to the new governor of Healy an 11-page memo outlining how the Commonwealth could prevent Holtec, which is the company that has the license to decommission, prevent Holtec from discharging to the bay. The Healy administration basically used a template that we gave them to issue a denial of Holtec's application to discharge Cape Cod Bay back in July. Holtec has decided to appeal that permit denial. We at PCC will be intervening in the appeal on the Commonwealth side by the 19th is our deadline to intervene. So we'll be making filings and briefing the case to make sure that the administrative review has a complete record of what the logic behind the denial ought to be and what the legal basis that requires the denial is, and to make sure that it's been upheld. It's our complete expectation that once they go through the administrative appeal process at DEP, that they will go to state and/or federal court seeking judicial intervention and a denial. This appeal process is gonna drag on for multiple years. In the meantime, what this means, the good news, it means they can't dump it in the bay.
Do you think they're leaking it out?
No, I don't.
You don't?
No,
Okay, I
they
was
don't.
not concerned, like,
the question was, well, they just doing it anyway, they're not. The nefarious or bad thing they are doing is in the winter, they're bringing heaters into the building, submersible heaters, and heating the water. And by heating it, inducing it to evaporate, it's going up into the air through the vent stack and out into the air. It has the greatest impact on people of Plymouth or adjacent, but with the right wind flow, it hits you people here in Eastham too. There's no, well, they're getting away with it because the regulation of atomic materials, nuclear materials, radioactive materials, is governed by something called the Atomic Energy Act. And the federal government preempted local, state, and regional authority to regulate radioactive discharges. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has that authority. They are, in our view, rather lax in terms of holding the nuclear power industry to a particular standard. And they allow for this level of radioactive release as being below what they deem to be the threshold to be hazardous to public health.
until.
We're Holtec to be just using evaporation as their primary means of disposal. They would face a higher burden of proof and threshold from the NRC. But because they're going through the charade of actually arguing that discharge into the ocean is their preferred means, they're allowed to continue to evaporate because it's not their primary means of disposal. The argument they're making is, well, it's cold in the winter, right? So we have workers in the building and we need to have a warm environment for them to work. So we have to heat the water. Okay, maybe, except maybe if you were concerned about worker comfort, you wouldn't have removed the conventional heating system from the building, leaving you no option other than to heat the water. So they created this situation to allow themselves the fig leaf of doing this for a reason that is really doesn't pass a straight face test. All that said, because the state lacks the authority to regulate the air emissions from a radioactive point of view, they have to regulate on conventional pollutants. And there's so little conventional pollutants they're allowed to regulate in the evaporative air emissions that it doesn't require a permit. So, Holtec is clever, if not public spirited, in their way of finding a way through the regulatory process to get them the outcome they want, which is to use a public resource, be it the water or the air, as a means of disposing of what would otherwise be an expensive quantity of water to get rid of, that they knew they were going to have to get rid of when they agreed to take on the project. So there's no surprise here. So we're going to defend the permit denial to ensure that they don't discharge to the bay, but we can't assure you that it doesn't mean that there won't be an unacceptable introduction of radioactive materials into the environment. So it's an air problem. Yeah.
Andrew, I'm wondering what would be some of the anticipated impacts if they were to discharge into the bay?
So the question is, what are the impacts of the discharge to the bay? And I guess part of my answer would be, it doesn't matter. Because of the matter of plain reading of the law, it's not allowed. So in order to have the law enforced, which is the law I'm speaking to, is the Ocean Sanctuaries Act, which the legislature passed in 1972, that prohibits the introduction of a bunch of things, but specific to this issue, industrial wastewater into an ocean sanctuary, of which Cape Cod Bay is so designated. The legislature was making, by issuing that blanket prohibition, was making a public policy decision that any of the prohibited activities would be to the detriment of the quality of the resource, and therefore it's disapproved on a blanket basis. So our ability to enforce that requirement is not contingent on our demonstration of the harm. So we never even got into the conversation and the technical disagreement about whether, 6 picocuries or 8 picocuries are the right limit. I don't care. I don't need to care. From a reputational point of view, you have the choice of renting a home on a body of water that has been irradiated or one that is not, where you're gonna go. You have the choice of eating a fish from a body of water that's been irradiated or one that's not, where you're gonna fit. You have a choice to eat that shellfish from an irradiated body of water or one that's not, where you're gonna choose. The answer is obvious. So there's a reputational and economic harm to the entirety of Cape Cod for this thing to be allowed. And we don't need to quantify it in order to enforce the law. So I haven't spent any time, money, or resources worried about it because I don't need to. They'd love to get into that conversation with us. And then have a dueling set of experts. Some saying it's fine, some saying it's the end of the world. Don't need to do that, haven't done that. And so, we could talk a little bit more about it, but I don't, because I don't want to get sucked down that rabbit hole because it's irrelevant.
And we won't go until something happens.
Well, the other thing about radioactivity is, other than acute exposure, and we're not making the case that this is an acute exposure. Other than acute exposure, the impacts are felt over time. So you get a long-term, higher than you should dose of radiation, it may be decades before that cancer manifests itself. It may be decades before that neurologic impact manifests itself. By then, they've taken their money and gone home and they're who knows where. So this is not one of those things where time is not your friend. And so, we're just not even going down that road at this point. So, like I said, we'll be filing our intervention prior to on or before September 19th. And then, frankly, the whole thing from a public point of view, it's largely gonna go quiet. This administrative appeal process is very much an inside baseball activity. And it can take 18 to 24 months, so there won't be a lot of public view on this thing. And in the interim, we anticipate they will continue to heat the water. And, started off with a 1.1 million gallon a day, or 1.1 million gallon problem last time they reported to us, was about 800,000. So I expect they will drag the appeals out until they've evaporated all the water. And then the whole issue will become moot and life will go on. So it's not super satisfying, but it's kind of where we are. Yeah.
I know we don't need to worry about it, but if they were to take all this water and ship it out, where would it go? I know it's not.
So it would probably go, it would go west. They have disposed of hundreds of thousands of pounds of radioactive building materials and nuclear contaminated materials from the operation in a licensed disposal facility in Texas. The water might go to Texas, might go to a facility somewhere else out in the far west. The water from Vermont Yankee Row was bundled up and shipped out west. And they slurry it up and make it, inert and store it in an area where, over the time, the half-life of the radioactivity associated with this water is not super long. I think it's like 13 years, so it goes down by half. The toxicity or radioactivity of it goes down by half every 13 years. So, the actually very radioactive rods that fuel the facility are in large concrete casts that are roughly about half the size of this room, cut it in half from the window. Vertically, the tall, narrow containers that have a bunch of radioactive rods in them, and they're stored on site. You can see them from the water. 18 or 20 of these large gaskets, basically. in which these highly radioactive materials are residing until there's someplace else for them to go. And one of the weaknesses in the whole nuclear industry is there is no place for it to go. You know, the federal government was supposed to do a disposal facility at Yucca Mountain in Nevada, I believe. That never came to be, and in fact, the United States taxpayer pays every one of these nuclear facilities a fee as a, under the concept of a breach of contract, that we built these facilities because you told us, you, the federal government, told us you'd have a place for us to dispose of it. So we acted upon your assurance, and now that you haven't provided us something, you need to pay us our damages. So the United States Treasury writes Holtec a check every year for millions of dollars for their supposed harm of having to store those rods on site. It's quite the financial model. So, I don't know, we good on time? You wanna?
Oh, we're fine. Just, are there any other questions or any other points you wanted to come?
I mean,
through, or
you know.
we're scheduled till 11:30.
Okay, so, you know, I will say, you know, we're going to be releasing our State of the Waters report, which we've done annually for each of the last 5 years, sometime this fall. We did not regrade the estuaries. They are the long-term bad water quality across the Cape. 90% of the Cape's estuaries fail to meet state or federal water quality standards. And that's not like, the ones that aren't bad yet are not likely to go bad over the course of last year. Those that were bad are not likely to have changed, because even in the towns that are beginning to implement wastewater management and nutrient load mitigation, the sewer systems that they may build are either not done or have begun operation so recently that the residual nitrogen that's in the groundwater from septic systems from historic use has not worked its way through the system yet. So we wouldn't anticipate a lot of improvement on water quality for the estuaries. We did reevaluate the ponds, and we generally found most of the ponds to be, on a gross level, pretty unchanged, which is, you know, a third, slightly more of the ponds that we evaluate in a given year show poor water quality. About 60% of the ponds are what we would consider to be marginal, which means that under the right set of circumstances in a given year, they may exhibit poor water quality. They might not. And a lot of the variability comes from this sort of inconsistency of precipitation patterns across the region. So, a couple of weeks ago, I was sitting in our office in Dennis, and the skies opened up. We got like 4 inches of rain in about 20 minutes. When my staff was in Chatham, like, what are you talking about? Right, it's been dry here. We got nothing in my house in Mashpee. So these heavy rainstorms that are a characteristic of an altered climate, they're tropical. We would have typically, in our younger days, thought of as tropical type systems. You know, big, heavy rainstorms, large quantity of water, in a short period of time, 2, 3, 4 inches, have become more prevalent. Their distribution is inconsistent. However, because they're so intense, they have a tendency to wash a lot of nutrient off the landscape. If the fertilizer truck hit the neighborhood that week and the rainstorm comes through, a lot of that stuff's gonna wash. And it washes into the pond. A lot of it's conveyed through municipal stormwater or side of the road runoff or down people's driveways into the pond. You get this pulse of food that results in these ponds getting a bloom. So that happens randomly. So, you know, a pond that we have some ponds that are really good every year. We have some ponds that are really bad every year. That's about 40%. And then we have about 60% in the middle that are kind of muddling by. In some years they get circumstances locally that cause them to exhibit bad water. Other years they get through it. So the data is pretty consistent. Unlike the estuaries where once you're designated to have a bad water quality, you're gonna have it for a while. Some ponds can be good one year, not so good the next year, good for 2 years, not so good for 4. It's all over the place, but it's pretty consistent in a Cape Cod place. The other factor that contributes to these same water quality is rising water temperature. As air temperatures have gone up, water temperatures have followed suit. So our friends at the Park Service monitoring some of the ponds in Wellfleet, they're pretty undeveloped and yet have some cyano issues associated with them. I think over the last 20 years, the average temperature in August is up 6 degrees. So think about it from a climate perspective, we talk about global temperatures, 2 degrees being a trigger, so 6 is a lot. So if you think about your gardener, in spring when you got the itch, what do you do to get plants to grow? You feed them, you put them in a moist environment like a greenhouse, and you warm them. And we've effectively done that to our ponds and our estuaries too. So warmer temperatures, higher nutrient loads, they fall right within the wheelhouse of cyanobacteria. They evolve at a time when the plant was first emerging, it was hot, there's a lot of nutrients around, and they are genetically predisposed to outcompete other forms of aquatic life in the conditions that we've created. So I think we can continue to expect, without intervention on nutrient load control, continue to see further declines in freshwater water quality, because it's beyond our individual capability to deal with the temperature issue. All the more important to deal with nutrients. And then, excuse me, the drinking water, our report will show that continued high quality water for drinking water supply to public water supply across the region. Nobody had poor water quality. I think 2 of the 21 systems that we evaluated had good, and everybody else was excellent. And the reason for that dichotomy between surface water and fresh water, or surface water and drinking water, is that towns have done a good job buying land around public water supplies, providing what's known as wellhead protection zoning, the zone out the most hazardous potentially hazardous land uses close to water supplies in order to maintain quality. And so the lesson here is when you do things consciously manage and preserve a resource, it works. If you don't, which is what's happened around our ponds and estuaries, promote development around these ponds, these waterways, everybody wants to be around the water, and then you strip the native landscape, replace it with field turf that wants fertilizer, remove native species that don't need fertilizer, replace them with things that make this look like New Jersey, that do require fertilizer or different soils than what we have. And then, spread that fertilizer around, you're going to get what we've got, and you rely on 19th century, 18th century technology for waste disposal, basically digging a hole in your yard, flushing it down the toilet, and it goes into the ground. You get what you pay for, basically, so we've programmed in poor water quality in ponds and estuaries, and we've gotten what was predictable. We did the opposite around drinking water supplies, and we see much better results. So the lesson is, you manage for quality, you can achieve it, and hopefully it will be something that we'll begin to be able to measure over time when we do future years for these reports to make sure that things that people are starting to do actually have a beneficial impact. So look for that report sometime this fall in more detail. And then lastly, I'll close on a little less direct concern to East Ham and Outer Cape is our efforts to preserve the Upper Cape water supply from being damaged by the proposed machine gun range in Joint Base Cape Cod. So for those not familiar, Joint Base Cape Cod is about an 18,000 acre insulation on the Upper Cape. 15 of the 18,000 acres are largely forested and known as the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve. It's the largest undeveloped, most productive tract of aquifer land on Cape Cod, set aside by the legislature in 2002 for the purposes of protecting the water supply for the 4 towns of the Upper Cape that abut the base, with the proviso that military training activities deemed consistent with the protection of the water supply and preservation of habitat could be allowed. National Guard has been pursuing on and off for decades the construction of a machine gun range on that base on the Upper Cape Water Supply Reserve, and is close to doing it. We've been fighting back for the last couple of years, bolstered by a report by the United States Environmental Protection Agency that, in fact, despite the Guard's internally developed and self-serving environmental analysis have found no impacts, and in fact, the proposed gun range represented what they deemed a significant threat to public health through the degradation of the water supply by the Upper Cape Reserve. The Guard disagrees with that finding. That finding has not been finalized because of the ability of the Department of Defense to get an EPA's way. So it's kind of sitting there in limbo. But the project can't move forward until that issue is resolved. Despite that, the National Guard has gone out to bid 3 times for pricing to construct the facility. Most recently in July of this summer. We have been blocking them in Congress from getting additional funding for the project or from obtaining a time extension that would extend the September 30th deadline for their initial funding of $9 million to expire. They went out for a bid for a smaller range in July, not because they intend to build a smaller range, but because they're desperate to have a construction contract which would obligate the original $9 million, which would prevent it from expiring on October 1st. We don't know. The bids were due on the 15th of August. We don't know if they signed a contract or not. For those that get our emails, we've been aggressively pursuing an email campaign for the governor to ask her in her role as chief executive officer, not only of the Commonwealth, but also the commanding officer of the Guard, just tell them they can't sign the contract. We've had extensive conversations with the governor's office and her staff, and me directly with her. I don't know what they're going to do. So we're a couple weeks away from the deadline funding. They might have signed the contract. I don't know. They might not have signed the contract. I don't know. She might have told them quietly they can't sign the contract. I don't know. What I do know is that we sought public information through state public records law back in July, seeking documents that would lead up to their decision to putting that reduced scale project out to bid, to see what they were thinking, why they were doing it. The deadline for responding to that public records request came and went, as 20 other ones have, with no response. We filed an appeal with Secretary of State, as we have with all the other state record requests, 9 others. All have resulted in an order from the Secretary of State to the Guard, telling them that they are obligated to respond and turn over documents. 6 of those have resulted in documents being turned over. 2 of them were ignored. We didn't ignore this order. The next day, they issued a denial of our request, citing exemptions under state law that don't apply in a particular case with documents of the sort we were at for. We were faced with the choice of either going back to Secretary of State and pursuing our administrative rights under their authority or going to some superior court to have a conversation with the judge. We chose the latter. We're in court with the guard on Friday. And I'm looking for the court to order them to turn over the relevant documents. They are working extremely hard to prevent us from seeing something. They have documents. Deny the existence of documents, they claim they didn't have to turn them over. And there's a difference between saying we don't have anything responsive to your request and saying you can't have it. So I'm real curious what we can't have. I'm hoping that Friday the judge will say, turn them over. We suspect there may be something that a governor would want to know before a contract executed. So we'll see. We'll see what kind of arguments they come with on Friday to try and sway the judge that we're not entitled to what the black letter reading law says we are. So saga will continue. If they don't sign the contract, their $9 million goes away. I don't think they'll be successful in convincing Congress to reauthorize new money, because it's not a $9 million project anymore. It's at least 15 based on the bids they got last year. But I don't expect them to give up. And even if they did sign a contract and money lives, there's still a lot we're gonna do. We're not gonna go away. So, and we're close to time. I don't know if there's any other questions, but
Could you talk about, the composting toilets and urine diversion?
Sure.
As alternate, would they help?
so the question has to do with alternative toilet technology. There's a couple. So one is composting toilets. We are in the process right now of renovating an antique barn on our property to something called the Coppell Center to Preserve Cape Cod. We are installing 2 composting toilets. Composting toilets work quite well, and they result in no liquid discharge, therefore no nutrient load associated with a particular building. So they are a really good solution if you want to have a home-based impact on nutrient loading. They're not inexpensive, and they are not, there's different types, and they have different space requirements. They are easier to install in new construction than they are to retrofit in existing, and they're not for everyone. Some people just don't want to do it. So, but they are a good solution. They work. And you have a compost that you can use garden application after the fact. So they are effective. The other thing that's out there being talked about a lot is urine diversion, which is basically, separating the urine from the waste stream. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. Everything from a bucket to the more advanced toilets that have 2 drains, and if your aim is good, in one and everything else goes in the other. So conceptually they work, right? 85% of the nitrogen in the septic waste stream is from urine. So if you can get that out, you make a big difference. The question is people's willingness to do it. The durability of the game. So you say, all right, I'm gonna build a house here. And I'm gonna have no nutrient impact because I'm gonna have urine diverting toilets. I also have to have a regular septic system because solid waste and, food waste and the like, that goes someplace. Great. You're the most compliant family in the world. You sell the house. New owner, I'm not doing that. And all of a sudden the nutrient impact goes way back up. You rent the house. You have no control over who's coming in and out of your house. How good are people about putting your dishes back where they are supposed to be, let alone, using the right drain on the toilet? How do you do it? From a town's perspective, in terms of evaluating how much load they need to reduce, how do you account for any of that? Right? And then lastly, where does urine go and who picks it up? So in Scandinavia, where they have a much more well-developed system, they have, there's a urine collection industry and they convert it over to fertilizer and they use it for agriculture. Okay. Who around here is doing that? It's chicken and egg problem too.
Yeah.
Without the market, who's gonna invest in the infrastructure to be able to do that? Who's gonna invest in the toilet technology if they don't have any way to get rid of the urine? So, you know, so it works.
Public acceptance, that's a big.
In a society where we ask people to do more for a broader public benefit, and there's seemingly less willingness to do so on a whole range of issues, I remain skeptical that this is a basis for a municipal scale response. It might make sense in hard to reach areas. It might make sense in seasonal areas that are really heavily seasonal. It might make sense in areas that are uneconomic to extend sewers, and you're dealing with your base load production, and anything you get from these outlying areas is extra, that's great. Counting on it as the solution, it seems unrealistic to me. So we're comfortable with it as an enhancement to and a supplement to a municipal scale solution, but not as a replacement to it.
Will your new building with the composting will be open?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I mean, the building is intended to demonstrate a lot. We have native landscaping. We're gonna use it as a teaching opportunity, so feel free to come use our toilet.
Hey, one more question. I was wondering, do you see any of the towns doing a particularly good job or exemplary job of educating their residents or encouraging or incentivizing residents to use less fertilizer or less grass?
Orleans has been great. Orleans has, been promoting, both reductions, special legislation, and town meeting action to reduce fertilizer and pesticide use. Now, they can't do it, because they need the legislature's approval to do it. But they've put together a pretty solid public education program in support of those, and both those petitions both passed in subsequent sequential years, town meeting. And Wellfleet's been looking at some of those issues, so it's, you know, Harwich took it up but didn't pass it. So there's a lot of work.
So as residents here in East Camden, that there are some models, Orleans, some of these other
There are.
communities that we wanted to, you know, encourage our town and elected officials to.
There are, and you know, East End benefits from having a really proactive and thoughtful health agent, Hillary Lamos. And
Okay.
who understands the wastewater issues, understands the loading issues from her days prior to being here in East End in Wellfleet. She's a really good partner, I think, the East End's done a lot of good things. So, you know, if you have people, I think it's important for residents to impress upon their elected appointed town officials, the importance they assign to these issues, because towns will pay a little bit more attention to things that they hear from their residents about than those that they don't. Because there's only so much time and energy to go into everything. So, you know, make yourself known.
Any other questions?
Great, thanks for your time.
Oh, thank you. So once again, folks who came in late, this is Andrew very gracefully agreed to let us record this meeting. So just to let you know, we may, you know, make this publicly available, so just so you know, if anyone's uncomfortable with that, let me know. But thank you so much. So I learned a lot today. So I encourage you to check out apcc.org, right? So too many programs to mention, and when speaking of the presentation, I highly encourage you to check out their website, check out the organizations that are supporting them. As you can see, you know, their work benefits all of us. So, and I learned something today about the composting toilet, maybe, you know, one of the, you know, decades ago, solar, what's, you know, put solar panels on the roof, and that's interesting to know that that's, you know, that's an option and what have you, and, yeah.
If you want to check one on the Wellfleet Bay Wildlife Sanctuary.
Oh, okay, wonderful,
You
okay.
don't want to travel to Dennis.
Okay, all right, well, thank you so much.
Thanks
This
for
has
having
been
me.
wonderful, and maybe we can ask you to come back. Sometimes, especially as some of these cases move
Sure.
along and what have you.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you, everybody for joining us. And tomorrow, just gonna say, we're gonna have, Tom McNellis from the, East Town Climate Action Committee. He's gonna talk about the town's climate action committee and some of their programs and some of their upcoming activities. So, you'll join us either in person or online for that as well. Thank you, everybody. Thank you again. Thank you so much for your presentation.